Pay attention to the young woman in the sparkly top dancing at this Denver nightclub. Her name is Kenya Monae, and she's 19 years old. She's at downtown club 24K with her closest friends, enjoying what should be an ordinary Friday night out. She has no idea that in less than 4 hours, her phone will be turned off forever. Now, pay attention to the man watching her from across the room. His name is Travis Forbes. He's 34 years old, and he's been observing Kenya all evening. He appears helpful, charming even, like a good Samaritan ready to assist. But behind his manufactured kindness lies something much darker. Within 3 hours, Kenya will take her final breath in the back of a stranger's van. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was a calculated hunt. At 2:51 a.m. on April 1st, 2011, surveillance cameras capture Kenya stumbling slightly as she exits the club. The cool Denver air hits her face as she realizes her friends have left without her. She's stranded downtown with no way home. That's when Travis approaches. His voice is calm and reassuring as he offers her a ride. Kenya, intoxicated and with limited options, accepts. She climbs into his van, unaware that she's just sealed her fate. Travis starts the engine and pulls away from the club. Instead of driving toward Kenya's apartment, he heads in the opposite direction, toward an isolated park where no one will hear her scream. Kenya Monae had grown up dreaming of a voice that would reach people across the airwaves. Born and raised in Denver, Colorado, she was a petite young woman at just 4 feet 11 inches tall, but her personality filled every room she entered. Her sister Kimberly would later describe Kenya as everything she wanted to be, a role model who brought light wherever she went. Kenya's family had come together in 2004 when her mother Maria married Tony Lee. The blended family included Kenya and her younger sister Kimberly, and they had worked hard to create a stable, loving household. Kenya was known as the responsible one, someone who kept an active social life but always stayed connected with her family. She and her mother spoke to each other every single day without fail. It was unusual if they went more than a few hours without checking in. Kenya had just completed a semester studying broadcasting at a local community college. She dreamed of working in media, of having a platform where she could use her voice to make a difference. Her family knew her as someone who rarely drank and who made careful choices about her social activities. When she did go out, she always ensured she had a safe way home. On March 31st, 2011, Kenya spent the evening at home with her family. She painted her nails while chatting with Kimberly about everyday things, like nail polish, colors, and weekend plans. The conversation was light and normal, full of the kind of sister talk that had become routine for them. When Kenya's boyfriend, Louis Easton, arrived to pick her up, their interaction was completely ordinary. Louis managed a 16 and over hookah bar where Kenya could spend time even though she wasn't yet 21. Louis later recalled their final exchange with heartbreaking clarity. Kenya looked at him and said goodbye, and he blew kisses to her as she walked away. He expected to see her again the next day, to continue their relationship and their shared plans for the future. It should have been just another ordinary evening in the life of this bright young woman who had so much to live for, but it wasn't. Travis Forbes appeared legitimate on every level that mattered to casual observers. He was 34 years old and operated a small granola bar business out of a commercial bakery in Denver. To his business associates and the bakery staff, he seemed like a quiet entrepreneur working to build something meaningful. He was polite in his interactions and kept to himself most of the time. Nothing about his daily demeanor suggested the predatory thoughts that occupied his mind during his off hours. However, Travis had been developing a calculated pattern of hunting behavior that had gone unnoticed by those around him. He frequented downtown Denver clubs and bars, not to socialize or enjoy music, but to study potential victims. His approach was methodical and patient. He would observe young women who appeared to be drinking alone or who had become separated from their groups of friends. Travis positioned himself as a helpful stranger, someone offering genuine assistance when women found themselves in vulnerable situations. He understood that intoxicated young women stranded late at night would be grateful for what appeared to be legitimate help. This Good Samaritan approach allowed him to gain access to victims who might otherwise exercise caution about accepting rides from unknown men. What made Travis particularly dangerous was his ability to appear trustworthy during the exact moments when victims needed help most. He had practiced this persona extensively, perfecting the right tone of voice and body language to seem harmless and concerned. His van was clean and ordinary looking, nothing that would immediately raise suspicions. Travis had been operating this hunting pattern for months, using his legitimate business as cover while he stalked the downtown entertainment district. Kenya Monae would become his most serious victim. But police would later discover he had targeted other young women using identical tactics. The evening of March 30 first began normally for Kenya and her two closest friends, Gigi and Brittany. The three had initially planned to spend time at Louie's hookah bar, where Kenya could enjoy herself in a familiar, safe environment. However, the girls decided to change their plans and use fake identification cards to gain entry to 24K, a downtown club that served alcohol to patrons 21 and over. This deviation from their original plan was not typical behavior for Kenya, who rarely drank and usually avoided situations that required deception or rule-breaking. However, the influence of her friends and the excitement of experiencing Denver's nightlife convinced her to go along with the new plan. At 24K, the three friends initially stayed together on the dance floor, enjoying the music and the energetic atmosphere. The club was packed with young people, and Kenya's sparkly top made her easy to spot among the crowd. This distinctive clothing may have been what first drew Travis Forbes' attention as he scanned the room for potential targets. As the evening progressed into the early morning hours, the three friends naturally drifted apart within the club. This was typical behavior for young people at dance venues, where groups often split up to visit different areas, use restrooms, or interact with other patrons. None of them saw this separation as risky behavior. They expected to reconnect before leaving and travel home together as they had originally planned. However, sometime around 2 a.m., a critical miscommunication occurred. Gigi and Brittany left the club without Kenya, apparently believing she had already departed or found her own transportation home. Kenya, meanwhile, found herself alone outside the club with no immediate way to return to her apartment. The cool April morning air sobered her slightly, but she remained disoriented and vulnerable. This was the exact moment Travis Forbes had been waiting for throughout his evening of observation. He had noted that Kenya was petite, appeared to have been drinking, and seemed to be without the protection of her friend group. When he saw her standing outside the club looking confused and stranded, he approached with his well-rehearsed offer of assistance. Security cameras from nearby businesses captured fragments of their interaction. The footage shows Kenya hesitating for approximately 30 seconds while Travis speaks to her. She appears unsteady on her feet, confirming that she had consumed more alcohol than usual. The timestamp on the surveillance video reads 2:51 a.m. when Kenya finally accepts Travis's offer and climbs into his van. At that precise moment, Kenya's fun evening out with friends transformed into the final hours of her young life. Travis pulled away from the club and began driving toward the outskirts of Denver, taking Kenya further from safety with each passing mile. The next morning, April 1st, Kenya's family received their first indication that something was terribly wrong. Louis called Kenya's sister, Kimberly, his voice filled with concern as he asked if anyone had heard from Kenya. When Kimberly said they hadn't, Louis explained that Kenya had never returned home and that she was missing. Kimberly's first reaction was complete disbelief. Given that it was April 1st, she assumed this had to be some kind of elaborate and cruel April Fool's Day prank. But when Louis's worry persisted and his voice remained serious, Kimberly realized this was no joke. She immediately called her workplace to report that she wouldn't be coming in, then rushed home to alert her parents. The family's panic grew exponentially with each passing hour as they tried calling Kenya's phone repeatedly with no response. They knew Kenya's communication habits intimately. She never went more than a few hours without contacting someone in the family, especially her mother Maria. The silence was completely out of character and deeply alarming. By afternoon, Kenya's friends Gigi and Brittany arrived at the family home. They brought with them Kenya's purse and cell phone, items they had retrieved from the club after realizing Kenya had disappeared. For Kenya's family, these personal belongings represented crucial evidence that something terrible had happened. Tony Lee, Kenya's stepfather, immediately understood the significance of these items. He knew Kenya would never voluntarily go anywhere without her cell phone. She was constantly connected to her family and friends through social media, text messaging, and daily phone calls. These were not objects a young woman leaves behind by choice. Tony immediately began a desperate search effort, calling every hospital, jail, and morgue in the Denver area. He was methodical and thorough, refusing to overlook any possibility, no matter how unlikely. When these inquiries yielded no results, he made the decision to file a formal missing persons report with the Denver Police Department. The desk officer who took Tony's report followed standard procedure for missing person cases involving young adults. He recorded all of Kenya's identifying information and assured Tony that most people in similar situations return home within 72 hours. The officer suggested that Kenya probably knew where she was and would likely contact her family soon. Tony desperately wanted to believe the officer was right, but his paternal instincts told him something horrific had happened to his stepdaughter. As Kenya's family grappled with their growing fear, the full story of her final evening began to emerge through questioning of her friends. When pressed by frantic family members, Gigi and Brittany admitted they hadn't been entirely truthful about their evening plans. Instead of going to Louie's all-ages hookah bar, as they had told their families, the three girls had used fake identification to enter 24K. The revelation about the fake IDs explained how underage girls had gained access to an adult nightclub, but it also revealed that Kenya had been in a much more vulnerable situation than anyone had originally understood. She had been drinking in an unfamiliar environment, surrounded by strangers rather than the familiar faces at Louie's establishment. This new information forced Kenya's family to confront the reality that their responsible, careful daughter had made some uncharacteristic choices that night. However, they refused to blame Kenya for what had happened to her. They understood that young people sometimes make impulsive decisions, and that such decisions should never result in tragedy. Meanwhile, Travis Forbes was continuing his regular business routine at the commercial bakery, acting as if nothing unusual had occurred. To anyone observing him during the daylight hours of April 1st, Travis would have appeared completely normal, focused on his granola bar production and maintaining his typical work schedule. But Travis was actually in the midst of executing a carefully planned cover-up of the most serious crime of his life, unknown to anyone else at the bakery. Kenya Monae was already dead, and Travis was methodically destroying evidence while maintaining his facade of normalcy. The first crucial 24 hours of Kenya's disappearance passed without any significant investigative breakthroughs. Her family continued their desperate search, contacting every possible lead and following up on any information that might provide clues to her whereabouts. Friends and extended family members joined the effort, spreading word about Kenya's disappearance throughout their community networks. Denver police began their initial investigation by interviewing Kenya's friends and boyfriend, carefully documenting the timeline of her last known activities. They also started canvassing businesses near 24K, hoping to locate surveillance footage that might show Kenya after she left the club. Detective Wayne Astro from the Denver Police Department was assigned to lead the investigation. Astro was a veteran investigator with extensive experience in missing person cases, and several aspects of Kenya's disappearance immediately raised red flags for him. The fact that she had left behind her purse and cell phone strongly suggested this was not a voluntary disappearance. Detective Astro began by meticulously reviewing surveillance footage from businesses around 24K. The grainy black and white images eventually revealed Kenya leaving the club alone, appearing unsteady on her feet. More importantly, the footage captured her interaction with an unknown man near a van parked on the street. The surveillance showed a tall man who appeared to be in his 30s approaching Kenya with what seemed like a helpful demeanor. He gestured toward his van in a way that clearly indicated he was offering transportation. Kenya hesitated briefly before accepting his offer and climbing into the vehicle. The timestamp showed this critical interaction occurred at 2:51 a.m. This surveillance footage represented the first major breakthrough in Kenya's case. Police now knew that Kenya had left the club with a stranger, and they had visual evidence of both the man and his vehicle. The van appeared to be an older model with some distinctive characteristics that investigators hoped would help them identify the owner. As Detective Astro expanded his investigation beyond Kenya's immediate case, he began receiving reports from other young women who had encountered a man matching the suspect's description near downtown Denver clubs. These women described a polite, seemingly helpful stranger who approached them when they appeared to be stranded or in need of assistance. Most of these women had declined his offers of help, trusting their instincts that something felt wrong about the interaction. However, a few had accepted brief rides and reported feeling uncomfortable during the encounters. One woman mentioned that the man had driven slightly out of the way and had made comments that seemed inappropriate. A disturbing pattern was emerging that suggested Kenya's disappearance was not an isolated incident. Police began to suspect they were dealing with a serial predator who systematically targeted vulnerable young women in Denver's entertainment district. The investigation took a dramatic turn when a young woman named Jessica contacted police with information that would prove crucial to solving Kenya's case. Jessica reported that 2 nights before Kenya's disappearance, she had accepted a ride from a man who matched the suspect's description and vehicle type. Jessica's account was harrowing. She said the man had initially appeared helpful and trustworthy, offering assistance when she found herself stranded outside a downtown club. However, instead of taking her home as promised, he had driven her to an isolated area where he sexually assaulted her. Jessica managed to escape during the attack and had been too traumatized to report the incident immediately. Jessica provided police with detailed information about her attacker, including a partial license plate number she had memorized during her escape. She also described specific details about the man's appearance and the interior of his van that corroborated the evidence investigators had gathered from the Kenya Monae case. Using Jessica's information, combined with the surveillance footage from 24K, police conducted a database search that yielded several potential vehicle matches. One name that appeared in the results was Travis Forbes, a 34-year-old man who operated a granola bar business from a commercial bakery in Denver. When investigators pulled Forbes's driver's license photograph and showed it to Jessica, she immediately and positively identified him as the man who had assaulted her. This identification gave police their first concrete suspect in Kenya's disappearance. However, Detective Astro knew they needed to proceed carefully. While they had strong evidence linking Forbes to Jessica's assault, they still lacked direct proof connecting him to Kenya's disappearance. Making a premature arrest could jeopardize their ability to build a solid case. Instead, police placed Travis Forbes under discreet surveillance while continuing to gather evidence. During this surveillance period, investigators observed Forbes maintaining his normal daily routine. He arrived at the bakery each morning, worked on his granola bar business throughout the day, and returned home each evening. On the surface, Forbes's behavior appeared completely normal. However, experienced investigators noticed subtle signs of stress and paranoia. Forbes seemed to be checking over his shoulder more frequently than usual and appeared nervous during interactions with other people at the bakery. After several days of surveillance, Detective Astro decided to approach Forbes for a voluntary interview. The goal was to gather additional information without alerting Forbes to the full scope of the investigation. The interview was conducted at police headquarters, where Forbes initially agreed to cooperate and answer questions about his activities. Forbes began the interview by denying any knowledge of Kenya Monae or the events at 24K on the night of March 31st. He claimed he had been at home that entire evening and had no reason to be in the downtown club district. His demeanor was calm and cooperative, suggesting he believed he could talk his way out of suspicion. However, when Detective Astro mentioned that police had surveillance footage placing Forbes near the club during the time frame of Kenya's disappearance, Forbes's composure began to crack. His answers became less confident, and he started showing visible signs of nervousness, including sweating and fidgeting. After several hours of patient questioning, Forbes changed his story significantly. He admitted that he had been downtown that night and acknowledged that he had encountered a young woman who appeared to need transportation assistance. However, he insisted that he had simply given her a ride to a gas station and had no further contact with her afterward. Forbes claimed he didn't know the woman's name and had no idea what happened to her after their brief interaction. He portrayed himself as a good Samaritan who had simply helped a stranger, with no ulterior motives or criminal intent. Detective Astro knew Forbes was lying, but the investigator needed more concrete evidence to prove it. The interview was concluded, and Forbes was released pending further investigation. Police continued their surveillance while working diligently to uncover additional evidence that would support criminal charges. The breakthrough came several weeks later when investigators gained access to surveillance footage from multiple businesses along the route. Forbes claimed to have driven on the night Kenya disappeared. This extensive video review revealed significant inconsistencies between Forbes's account and the actual evidence. The footage showed Forbes's van traveling in directions that contradicted his story about where he had taken Kenya and what time he had supposedly dropped her off. More damaging was the timeline evidence showing Forbes had not gone directly home as he claimed, but had instead made several unexplained stops during the early morning hours. Most significantly, police discovered that Forbes had access to commercial facilities at the bakery where he worked, including a large walk-in freezer. When investigators applied for a search warrant for the bakery premises, they prepared for what they suspected would be a grim discovery. The bakery's own internal security system provided the evidence that would ultimately solve Kenya's case. The surveillance footage showed Forbes arriving at the facility at approximately 5 a.m. on April 1st, just hours after Kenya's disappearance from 24K. What the cameras captured next was deeply disturbing. Forbes was seen entering the bakery's office area, where he immediately disabled the surveillance system. This action alone was highly suspicious, as there was no legitimate business reason for shutting down security cameras during normal work hours. When the cameras came back online several minutes later, Forbes was wearing heavy yellow cleaning gloves that were clearly not part of his normal granola bar production routine. These were industrial-grade gloves designed for handling hazardous materials or conducting heavy-duty cleaning operations. The surveillance footage then captured Forbes wheeling a large storage container from the office area toward the bakery's walk-in freezer. The container was one he typically used for storing granola bar ingredients, but it was sealed with duct tape and appeared to be significantly heavier than normal based on Forbes's obvious struggle to move it. When Detective Astro reviewed this footage, he immediately understood its implications. The container was the right size to hold a human body, particularly someone as petite as Kenya Monae. The timestamp showed Forbes placing the sealed container in the freezer at 5:27 a.m. on April 1st. This surveillance evidence provided investigators with the proof they needed to arrest Travis Forbes for Kenya's death. The footage clearly documented him conducting what appeared to be a crime scene cleanup and body concealment in the hours immediately following Kenya's disappearance. When confronted with this overwhelming evidence, Forbes initially continued his denials. However, as Detective Astro methodically walked him through each piece of surveillance footage, Forbes realized that continued lies were futile. The weight of the evidence against him was simply too substantial to overcome. After hours of intense interrogation, Travis Forbes finally confessed to ending Kenya Monae's life. His confession revealed the full scope of what had happened during those early morning hours that transformed a young woman's night out into a family's worst nightmare. Forbes admitted that after convincing Kenya to accept a ride from 24K, he had deliberately driven her to an isolated park area rather than toward her home as she had requested. Once there, he sexually assaulted her while she was unconscious from alcohol consumption. When Kenya regained consciousness and realized what was happening, she began fighting back with everything she had. Forbes said she started screaming for help, desperately trying to attract the attention of anyone who might be within hearing distance. Fearing that Kenya's screams would bring police or Good Samaritans to investigate, Forbes made the decision to silence her permanently. He placed his hands around her neck and applied pressure until she stopped breathing, ending her young life in the back of his van in that isolated park. Forbes then described spending the entire day of April 1st driving around Denver with Kenya's body in his van, trying to determine how to dispose of the evidence. Eventually, he placed her remains in one of his commercial storage containers and transported it to the bakery freezer, exactly as the surveillance cameras had documented. Based on Forbes's detailed confession, police were able to locate the remote area where he had eventually buried Kenya's remains. The recovery of her body provided definitive closure to the case, though it could never ease the devastating grief of her family. Travis Forbes was formally charged with first-degree felony assault and first-degree intentional homicide. Faced with overwhelming physical evidence, including multiple surveillance videos and his own detailed confession, Forbes chose to plead guilty rather than subject Kenya's family to the trauma of a lengthy trial. The judge sentenced Forbes to life in prison without any possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again have the opportunity to harm another innocent young woman. For Kenya's family, the resolution of the criminal proceedings marked the beginning of a different and equally difficult journey. Tony Lee described the devastating phone call from the district attorney's office informing him that Kenya's body had been recovered. Until that moment, he had maintained a sliver of hope that somehow his stepdaughter might still be alive. When Tony delivered the news to Kenya's mother, Maria, her first question was whether Kenya was okay. Tony had to tell her that Kenya was gone, that they had lost her forever. The family's grief was profound and would continue affecting them for years to come. Kenya's sister, Kimberly, struggled with survivor's guilt and the loss of her role model. She had looked up to Kenya as everything she wanted to become. And now she had to navigate her remaining teenage years without her sister's guidance and support. The case highlighted the vulnerability of young women in downtown entertainment areas and the predatory behavior of individuals like Travis Forbes, who systematically exploit that vulnerability. Police worked with club owners and community organizations to increase awareness about the tactics used by predators who pose as helpful strangers. Kenya's story became an integral part of safety education programs designed to help young women recognize potentially dangerous situations and avoid accepting transportation from unknown individuals, regardless of how trustworthy they might appear. The investigation into Kenya Monae's death demonstrated that evil can hide behind the most ordinary and legitimate appearing facades. Travis Forbes had successfully presented himself as a respectable businessman while harboring the darkest criminal intentions. His ability to appear helpful and trustworthy during victims' most vulnerable moments made him particularly dangerous. However, the case also showcased the power of thorough police investigation combined with modern surveillance technology in bringing killers to justice. The multiple security cameras that captured different aspects of Forbes' crime and subsequent cover-up provided investigators with an unbreakable chain of evidence that made conviction inevitable. Most importantly, Kenya's case illustrated how the love and determination of family members can drive an investigation forward even when hope seems lost. Tony Lee's refusal to accept easy explanations and his insistence that Kenya would never disappear voluntarily helped maintain pressure on investigators during the crucial early stages of the case. The extensive surveillance footage that ultimately proved Travis Forbes' guilt serves as a reminder that in our interconnected modern world, cameras are constantly recording. Forbes believed he could commit the perfect crime by appearing helpful and methodically disposing of evidence. Instead, the very technology he attempted to manipulate became the primary tool that brought him to justice. Kenya Monae was 19 years old when her promising life was cut short by a predator who saw her temporary vulnerability as an opportunity for violence. She had dreams of working in broadcasting, of using her voice to reach people and make a positive difference in the world. Those dreams died with her in the back of Travis Forbes' van. But her story continues to serve as both a warning and a call for justice. Years later, Kenya's family continues honoring her memory while working to prevent similar tragedies from befalling other families. They have spoken publicly about the importance of maintaining close communication with family members and exercising extreme caution about accepting help from strangers during vulnerable moments. In the end, Travis Forbes received exactly what he deserved, a life sentence that ensures he will spend his remaining years in prison, never again posing a threat to innocent young women. Kenya's family found some measure of peace knowing that justice had been served, even though nothing could bring back the bright, loving young woman they had lost. The case of Kenya Monae reminds us that evil exists in our world, actively seeking opportunities to cause harm. But it also demonstrates that love, determination, and methodical investigation can ensure that evil does not ultimately triumph. Kenya's memory lives on through her family's ongoing advocacy work and through the important safety lessons learned from her tragic death. Her story stands as proof that even in our darkest moments, justice can prevail when good people refuse to give up the fight for truth and accountability.